Hi, I'm Turk Strongman at the Ranki Ramacharaka. Thank you for selecting this second video in a series about the law of rhythm, how to use the law of rhythm. In this video, in the first one, I made some general notes, just kind of off the cuff, whatever came to my mind. Now, I'm going to get more particular, more selective about the content of this video and the rest to follow in this series. But before I get started, let me just ask you to give this video a thumb up. If by the end of it, it turns out you like it, then I'll remind you then to do that. And if you haven't done so already, please take the time right now to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell feature. And of course, share the joy of this channel with others. And those things having been humbly requested, now, how to use the law of rhythm. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn to William Walker Atkinson. He discussed the law of rhythm specifically in two of his books. One, he was a co-author of the Kybalion, and there's some mention of it in there, but to much greater extent in the Arcane Teaching. And then there is talk of it again in the Arcane Formulas. At first here, I'm just going to read to you what there is in the Kybalion about the law of rhythm specifically, and then also in the Arcane Teaching. But this is not a formal narration of those chapters, of those books, or those parts of those books, because I'm going to spin off as I feel that it fits and make my own comments. There's much to say. And so let's get started. In the Kybalion, the law of rhythm. Under this law falls a variety of phenomena, among which is the important phenomenon of vibration. Everything is in constant vibration. Everything material, mental, or of energy. Upon this fact, it depends the variety, degrees, states, and conditions of the manifestations of the cosmos. All is in vibration, physical, mental, and spiritual. Vibration is the key of relative power and relative activities. To control vibration is to control all the forces in the universe. The control of vibrations forms an important part of the Arcane Formulas. Now, on to what he wrote in the Arcane Teaching book. Much greater extent. Rhythm. And here he quotes something from the Kybalion to get started. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. From the Kybalion. Now, moving on. The great fifth Hermetic principle. Now, here in the Arcane Teaching, he lays out 7 universal laws. And this is the 5th one that he's getting to in expanding on the list that he made earlier in an earlier chapter. The great 5th Hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm. Now, you notice here he calls it a principle. In the Kybalion, he calls it a law. Either way. Now, here's what I do. You may, this might help you when you come upon, see, these kind of terms can be confusing until you get really familiar with an overview of all the information relevant to the subject, that you can come upon over a period of time. After a good bit of study, you notice correspondences among different terms. Well, at first you might think, oh, well, there's a principle of rhythm, and then there's a law of rhythm. I need to look into that. But then you find that it's the same author who used both, and he's referring to the same thing. In one case, he just calls it a law. In another case, he just calls it a principle. Same thing. All right, but here's what I do. I delineate the word, my uses of the word rhythm and the word principle. In such as so, and this is just rough, right? But I do have different uses for them. Let's say the law of opposites. Law of opposites. He refers to the law of opposites. I think elsewhere he refers to the law of polarity. Well, okay. Here's what I do. I stick with the law of opposites as a name. But then I say, inherent in that law, inherent to that law, is the principle of polarity. It's a principle. See, we have a law, right? And then a law. That's the statement of the thing. That's the name we give it. But there's a cosmic principle of operation locked into that law, and I call that then the principle of polarity. All right, I wanted to clear that up because you'll find William Walker Atkinson, under his various pen names, using the word law in one case, principle in another, and then you hear me, and I kind of like combine them, but have specific purposes for each word at the same time. I just don't want you to be confused over this. It's rhythm. It's rhythm. What we're talking about here is rhythm, all right? Now, I want to branch off into one other thing here before I continue. In the first video, I started off saying, I'm just going to take it that we all, you all, whoever, we all know what rhythm is, okay? So let's just go from there. We'll presuppose that. But I want to make a note about that. Excuse me while I smoke. I want to make a note about that. Sometimes when people start looking deeply into something, into the behind the scenes, the more hidden, the inner understanding of a thing like rhythm. Certain sources of information, as well as your own belief system, may come into play, work together to cause this idea that the rhythm you know about already in life, you're just like your normal, everyday, pedestrian understanding of rhythm and your use of the term rhythm falls way short of what you're after, and what you're after is something different. Something like this information here is talking about. It's not really referring to the kind of like naively ignorant use of the term that you employ most of the time. But in other words, maybe it would lead you wondering whether you should, look for a definition of rhythm as it applies, or in the context of what we're talking about here. Maybe there's kind of like a different definition going on. Maybe it's not exactly rhythm as you know it. Well, that's a mistake. That would be to kind of like overcomplicate the matter. No, we're talking about rhythm, and you know what it is. Now, let me give you an example of my response to that. In a sense, there was a professor, Ludwig Wittgenstein. He's a philosopher who's in the history of philosophy textbooks. One of the last ones who actually made it in. Had something major to contribute in an entire system, philosophical system. All right, so Ludwig Wittgenstein, he was about in the 50s. He was a professor of philosophy at Princeton University, and he developed a course, a lecture, a series of lectures that would be a course on the nature of time. Time. Well, on the first day of class, one of the students, right at the end, as people were starting to get up, the student put up his hand and asked, "Professor, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page here as is the departure point with respect to time into the coursework here. So let me just ask, what is time? Let's just get. I would like to start with an understanding of what we're talking about here. That corresponds with what you hold to be the definition of time. Just a basic definition of time. What is time? And Wittgenstein, who was packing up his papers there into his briefcase to move on to the next class or back to his office, looked at his watch and said, if you don't know the answer to that by now in your life, I'm sorry, I don't have time to talk to you about this right now. And he walked out. That was his answer. It's time as the student already knew. And then that's the starting point, okay? Same here, rhythm, okay? You know what rhythm is, okay? We're talking about that, okay? The great fifth Hermetic principle, the principle of rhythm, embodies the truth that in everything there is manifested a measured motion, a to and from movement, a flow and inflow, a swing forward and backward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide-like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide. Between the two poles manifest on the physical, mental, or spiritual planes. The principle of rhythm is closely connected with the principle of polarity. By the way, which was described in the preceding chapter. We'll have to get to that another time. I've talked about polarity here in other videos anyway. Rhythm manifests between the two poles established by the principle of polarity. Let me say that again. I brought this up in the first video, the one just before this in this series also. Rhythm manifests between the two poles established by the principle of polarity. This does not mean, however, that the pendulum of rhythm swings to the extreme poles. This rarely happens. In fact, it's difficult to establish the extreme polar opposites in a majority of cases, but the swing is ever toward first one pole and then the other. There's always an action and reaction, an advance and a retreat, a rising and a sinking, manifesting in all of the airs and phenomena of the universe. Suns, worlds, men, animals, plants, minerals, forces, energy, mind and matter, yes, even spirit manifests this principle. The principle manifests in the creation and the destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, in the life history of all things, and finally, in the mental states of man. Beginning with the manifestations of spirit, of the all, it would be noticed that there is ever the outpouring and the indrawing, the outbreathing and the inbreathing of Brahm, as the Brahmins word it. Universes are created to reach their extreme low point of materiality and then begin in their upward swing. Suns spring into being, and then their height of power being reached, the process of retrogression begins. And after eons, they become dead masses of matter, awaiting another impulse which starts again their inner energies into activity, and a new solar life cycle is begun. And thus it is with all the worlds. They are born, grow, die, only to be reborn. And thus it is with all the things of shape and form. They swing from action to reaction, from birth to death, from activity to inactivity, and then back again. Thus it is with all living things. They are born, grow, and die, and then are reborn. So it is with all great movements, philosophies, creeds, fashions, governments, nations, and all else: birth, growth, maturity, decadence, death, and then new birth. The swing of the pendulum is ever in evidence. Night follows day and day night. The pendulum swings from summer to winter and then back again. The corpuscles, atoms, molecules, and all masses of matter swing around the circle of their nature. There is no such thing as absolute rest or cessation from movement, and all movement partakes of rhythm. Rhythm, the principle, is of universal application. It may be applied to any question or phenomena of any of the many planes of life. It may be applied to all phases of human activity. There is always the rhythmic swing from one pole to another. The universal pendulum is ever in motion. The tides of life flow in and out according to law. I'm going to end there. It's 16 minutes into your time now. So I think I'm going to cut it off right there. The next video will be number 3 in this series. Now listen, I hope that you find this interesting, and if you're interested in the law of rhythm and how to apply it, how to use it in your life, how to, the inner workings of affairs. This is a very fundamental thing here, okay? We're getting down to, you want an occult viewpoint? Here you go, man. And yeah, every time we're talking about rhythm there, you can use your going definition as a basic understanding of what that means anytime that word pops up in any of this. Okay? Alright, there you go. Remember, if you like this video, you should be able to determine that by now, right? Then give it a thumb up. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell feature, share the joy of the channel with others, and remember, you heard it first, right here on Thranki Ramachiraka. I'm Ter Strongman. Now go be well.